Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome to this SFP London Student Chapter Talk. I'm Matt Bonner. You may recognise me. I'm the treasurer of this chapter. Today, we do a number of talks like this through the year. Talks from experts in fire safety in industry, academia, and people sharing their expert insights. If you like this talk and you want to see more, please follow us on Twitter at SFP London. You can find all the information there, or you can sign up to our mailing list. Today we've got a talk from Dr Nils Rönner. He actually studied his PhD at Imperial College with us. He studied a PhD in polymer flammability. It's very interesting, but he transitioned into industry. He's now working with BASF, working in digital strategy and R&D. And today he's going to be talking to us about that topic, about transforming industrial R&D with digitalization. So it's going to be a really interesting talk. I hope you'll enjoy it. And I'll pass over to Niels. Oh, actually, one last thing. If there's a Q&A function in the chat, feel free to post questions during the talk. I'll be looking at them and reviewing them through the talk. I'll try and publish them so you can all see them. And at the end of the talk, I'll ask some of them to Niels. So yeah, please just do that throughout the talk, but we won't answer them until the end. Okay, so without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome Nils Rönner. Take it away, Niels.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I hope you can all hear me and see my screen right now. So thanks for the kind introduction. So as Matt said, my name is Nils Rönner. I work in BASF in digitalization of R&D. And today I want to present a few things about what we do to transform industrial R&D with digitalization at BASF. So to begin with, what is BASF? I'm aware that quite a few of you might not know BASF very well. It's a company which is not always in the spotlight, mostly because it serves industry rather than end consumers primarily. But what you can see here on the picture could give you some impression of what BASF is. This is the Ludwigshafen site here. It is the largest site which BASF has at about 10 square kilometers of land size. In it, there's over 200 production sites and 100 kilometers of roads, 230 kilometers of rail. So basically, it is very big. So that's the main site in Ludwigshafen, where the company is based. But of course, it is more than that. So BASF is, or claim is we create chemistry, and the chemistry which BASF produces is used in almost all industries. The goal is to combine economic success with social responsibility and environmental protection. And it's one of the largest chemical companies in the world. I don't have the most up-to-date numbers on the slide, but 2018 is maybe recent enough that it still counts. So we have about 62 billion in sales in 2018. And that's achieved with about 122,000 employees globally. There's 6 Verbund sites. So Verbund site is the ones which are like Ludwigshafen, which means that there's one big site which produces a lot of different chemicals, and it's all interconnected. So that means that heat and waste products and produced products get moved around between different sites to increase the overall efficiency. But there's also about 355 other production sites globally spread everywhere. And in the end, over 90,000 consumers from various sectors are served. Now, what kind of materials do we produce? There are 5 segments in total. There is chemicals, which is a a mix of petrochemicals, monomers, intermediates. So it's very much at the beginning of the value chain when you start at the crude oil, for example. Then there's performance products, which are things such as pigments, which are used in car paints. There's also care chemicals, which, for example, go into your shampoo or soap, things like that. We also have agricultural solutions, which are primarily around crop protection. And there's also oil and gas business. Why am I talking about this? Because the one I want to focus on today is the functional materials and solutions segment, because that's the one I'm working in. And more specifically, I work in the performance materials division. So even though what I say does apply to more segments within BASF, just be aware that it is the primary focus is around one specific unit. And what is this unit? So performance materials, we have 4 target industries. And with that, it might give you some idea of the types of products which my division sells. One of the industries is consumer. One example for that is a shoe shown here. So the Adidas Ultra Boost shoes, probably a lot of you know them or even might own some of them. The midsole, so the cushioning bit made from those little beads, that's actually produced by BASF. We also produce a lot of materials around transportation. A lot of that goes into cars. So a lot of the materials which you touch within the car, so your dashboard, your headliner, your seats, and so on, but also a lot of the materials which you don't touch. So that's part of the suspension components, bits around the engine, surrounding electronics, and so on. Some body parts as well, maybe. So these are the types of materials which we sell there. Then there's also construction. Construction primarily focuses around insulation materials, so that your house needs less heating and cooling. And then there's also industrial, and that's very much a mixed bag, but includes things such as materials for the energy business. Okay, and now when I talk about R&D, it's not that there is one single site which does R&D. Actually, there's 70 global sites spread around the world, as you can see. The main ones are highlighted here, but there's many more smaller ones. The main ones I focus on are 4 main ones. That is the one in Ludwigshafen, the one in Lemförde, the one in Wyandotte and in Shanghai, but there's also a few smaller sites which are also of relevance. So I hope that this overview gave you some idea of what BASF is, the types of products my presentation focuses around, and when I talk about R&D, what I actually mean. And I don't mean a small team of a few people, but it's actually a global team spread around, which we need to serve. And now, what do I mean by digitalization and R&D? What are the types of technologies or approaches which we are focusing on? So we aim to integrate digital technologies into the everyday R&D operations. The first one being data science. So that's it includes data management and is basically the aim to produce value and insight from the data which we collect, mostly that lab data, but also pilot plant and so on. Then there's also scientific modeling. So that's really modeling from first principles. A lot of you are probably also aware of it, and that supplements the data science when we know more about the systems and can describe them really well from first principles, or we want to go outside of the scope which we've measured before. That's where scientific modeling comes in for us. Then there's also knowledge solutions that really focuses all around searching documents and gaining insight from written words and so on, journal papers. I will not talk too much about this one in today's presentation, but just so you're aware, that is also on the map. And then there's lab process automation. So that's everything around automating the process around measurements and experiments. And so how do these various tools and approaches fit together into our landscape? And this is the general landscape which we are building. In the center of it is the R&D employee in BASF. And what he does, he or she does mostly and primarily is, or traditionally especially, is experiments in the lab. So it's shown here in the bottom left corner. Actually, let me try and get a laser point up here. Okay, so down here, doing experiments to identify new chemistry and also confirm optimizations for various products. That's where we all start, and that's what people traditionally do. Then what is now the new thing, or it's been going on for a little while, is that all the data should be entered into an electronic lab journal, so that all the data recorded and all the experiments done in the lab get entered into this system, which also helps in calculations for formulating work. And that's the main data entry point. Once we have all this data, it gets moved into the central data lake, which is the central storage. And the electronic lab journal is not the only source for the data lake, but there's also other tools such as data from the pilot plant I mentioned, data from other testing units within the same company, and so on. So we try and bundle everything together, all the data which we have available in different, what were traditionally data silos. And then this data is being made available via various analysis tools, which help us connect the information, figure out what belongs together, and then really make it presented again to the R&D employees so that they can search for historical data. They can do trend analysis and build statistical models based on the data which we have collected. And that then really helps us in gathering all the knowledge which we have available, identify trends, see historical context, and then shape the next batch of experiments so that we focus on the optimum and do not spend too much time on experiments which do not perform quite so well as others. But of course, there's also there's not only the data aspect to it. There's also, as I mentioned, scientific modeling, and that can supplement really this knowledge gathering work. If we have models based on first principles, we can include those, and colleagues can learn more. Maybe figure out what happens if they go outside the previously measured realm, and really get a more unified picture of what we know. And then, of course, there's also lab automation, which then helps us speed up the experimental process by either taking out some of the manual work in the measurement, which is very much sort of standard work for the most part, but then also maybe do work which is maybe around hazardous materials, which humans are not quite so well equipped to handle. So we can then speed up and improve the processes around the experiments and testing. So this hopefully gives you an overview of how these various techniques fit together in our digital landscape. And now I want to show you two examples of how this actually works and how this has been applied in the past. The first one is using statistical modeling to predict UL94 performance. Some of you might be familiar with the UL94 test. It's a very common flammability test for polymers. And the way it's set up is that there is a sample suspended vertically. A burner is applied to it twice for 10 seconds each. And then the burn time, the total burn time, which consists of the first and the second burn when the flame is applied, is being measured, and then there is a certain rating is being calculated based on it, which then classifies the material based on how well it performs. Now, the problem with that is that this test, even though it's commonly used and lots of our customers want it, and so we do a lot of these tests, but it doesn't correlate very well with other flammability tests. Those of you working in fire science are probably familiar that not all of these tests correlate very well to each other. And so, for example, the cone calorimeter, which is also a very popular test, does not fit very well or doesn't correlate very well with the UL94 test. We also have complex multi-length and multi-time scale scenario at hand here, so even a fundamental modeling approach is not all that easy. And so what we would like to do is have a fast way to predict of our compositions before we run this test, especially because most of these samples need to be injection molded, which again is another step which takes time and effort and cost. And so we can filter out all of the compositions which won't perform well and focus on the ones which do perform well. We can produce even better products. And so this can be done reasonably well using quite straightforward statistical models. So this work was presented by Roland Krämer at the FRPM 2019. So if you want to read up more details, I recommend looking at that presentation. But the brief or the main message is that he took about 140 of these tests. They are classified from a V0, which is best, all the way down to a fail based on the standard. And then he linearized this from 1 meaning fail to 4 being a V0 based on an empirical formula. He translated this into numbers, this classification, and then used descriptors, such as how much inert reinforcement, so glass fibers, were in this material, how much residue it formed in an inert environment, and so on and so forth. And if you then do that, you can build a statistical model which predicts quite well the observed performance. A perfect fit would be just all the dots falling on this line perfectly. But so this didn't happen, especially in the sort of V1, V2 spectrum, you see a fair bit of scatter. However, the very bad ones do focus around the lower end. And so even a rather simple statistical model enables us to sort of identify the not very good compositions, and that way we don't need to do those experiments. A second example, which I'd like to talk about, is how scientific modeling can be used to predict PU foam properties. So polyurethane foams are used, for example, in car seats, such as the one shown here. So it's the material which gives it a soft and feeling which we all want. And if you look at the foam under microscope, it looks something like this. So you have a lot of open cells which let the air or the gases inside go in and out when it gets compressed and rebounds. And you have this matrix material, which is the polyurethane, which gives it the shape, so that it retains the shape, and also once you've compressed it, make sure that the foam re-expands to the original shape. And so, the customers require tailor-made application properties, so that it has a certain amount of indentation for a certain amount of force, for example, and then also that, of course, can be produced efficiently. So how it reacts, how quickly it forms, is all very important. The problem is, or the challenge is, that it's a very complex scenario where we have kinetics, so chemical kinetics of the reaction. We have the matrix material, so that's the polymer, has its own properties, but then of course it gets intermixed with the foam structure, because if you have smaller pores, you get different properties from when you have larger pores. If they are stretched, maybe the pores, again, you get very different properties. So you have a very large number of degrees of freedom. And the challenge was how to predict performance of formulations to quickly find optimal solutions. And this was done. What you can see up here is a time series of how a foam forms. So you have down here just a pool of liquid. That's the polyol and the isocyanate component, which forms the polyurethane mixed together. Then it reacts, it heats up, there are CO2 is released into the material, which makes it bubble, which so that means that it all rises. And then as it bubbles and rises, the polymer forms at just the right speed to make sure that it doesn't restrict the foaming and the increase in volume, but also isn't too slow so that the material basically freezes in at just the right time to make sure we have a nice foam which looks something like this. And so a lot of submodels were created, which took in the chemistry of the base components, reaction kinetics were measured, and based on that, a prediction of the bulk material properties was made. And this all then got combined with a model for the foam structure, where you need to take into account things such as the bubbles forming, what size. Bubbles can also coalesce into one bigger bubble. And so all of this, so there was a model for the foam structure. And then that basically gives you the part which is interesting to the producer. So how the material actually forms and how quickly it forms. And then once you have the finished material, you can then build a model to predict the foam performance. So basically that's mechanical properties primarily. Some more details can be found in the report down here. So this was an EU-funded project called Modena. So you can Google it if you want to go into the fine details of it. But the main message is that lots of submodels were able to be combined to give a model for overall PU foaming properties. And so the model then looks something like this. So we again see these pictures of the foam, which we saw just before. And the model then was able to predict this quite closely, as you can see. So you first start off with a very dense pool of liquids. The density reduces, the foam rises, and then eventually you have a low density foam. Now, where do these calculations run? Of course, my laptop is not powerful enough to run these models. So BSF actually has its own computing cluster called Curiosity. It was introduced in late 2017, has about 1.75 petaflops. I think the latest information I saw was that it's the largest in the chemical industry, but maybe this is no longer quite up to date. However, it increased the computing power available to R&D employees by a factor of 10 when it was introduced. So it really was a big step forward, and this is sort of the working horse which we use to run these complex models and enable us to not have computers or laptops running for 10 hours a day doing something they're not designed to do. And then once we have these models, what do you then do with it? Because those of you who have done modeling know that you yourself might be very familiar with the model, know how to use it. Often it's based in an environment which is not very user-friendly. Some of you might be familiar with that. But we need to make these models available to a large number of users who are not experts in modeling. And so the way it works is that we have modeling projects, which then produce various models or maybe even submodels, which can then be combined to run in apps and with a user-friendly user interface. And that really ensures that there is a retention and accessibility of knowledge and the models via apps. So if a colleague who made the app maybe goes into retirement, for example, the knowledge and how to run this model is not lost, and colleagues can use it. There is an internal app store which allows the colleague to quickly find the relevant app for their use case, and then they can do virtual screenings, for example, before they confirm the results in the lab, and that way weed out all the not so good options and are left with the best option. So that's basically what I want to say about modeling. But then there's also automation, as mentioned before. And there's basically two main sections which we are looking at. There is the automation of analog processes. So that's things such as sample preparation, sample testing, or chemical analysis, and moving samples around. So the main challenge here is that we have, or traditionally, there were sort of monolithic big machines which are able to do exactly one type of test. And so the goal is to move away from those and have more flexible machinery which can adjust and can do most of the manual steps themselves, with the ultimate goal that each sample can be treated differently to the next sample in a fully automated fashion, so that human intervention is minimized, and even that the movement of samples can be automated. So in a few places within BSF, we're actually at the point that we have automated guided vehicles which move the samples around between labs. And those are even able to use the elevator. And so this might not sound all that impressive if you compare that to the, say, automotive industry, where they are very strong in automating their production. However, we have a few additional challenges since we're working in chemical R&D. The first one is that the samples which we're transporting can, in some cases, be dangerous. So extra security and safety around the sample needs to be ensured. And then the second one is that we work in R&D. So we don't have a fixed production process, but rather things change, constantly need to adjust the testing methods to new materials. There might be new testing methods based on customer requests and so on. And so there's a lot of complexity involved, which we need to overcome. But then there's also the automation of digital processes, and that includes the data collection and transfer from the machines to eventually the data lake I mentioned earlier. And there we have the complexity that the machines from different manufacturers tend to have their own standards. And so we do not start from a blank slate. So we need to work with the manufacturers to make sure that we can get all the data in and out of the machines as we need, and then make this data available in dashboards, for example, so that the colleague can quickly find the measurement point they're interested in and learn about how the sample performed. And overall, this enables us to allow the humans to focus on the complex and engaging tasks, not so much sort of doing the same step over and over again for hours on end, and also, of course, increase efficiency, because if these robots and these machines can run overnight, for example, then we of course can have more samples tested. And up to now, I was talking a lot about technology, how we use data, how we produce models, how we automate things. But of course, with a large organization, I mentioned earlier, we have various R&D sites spread around the globe. We also need to take the humans into account, because in the end, we work with humans and they are our main asset. And so we need to transform the organization as well as we do this digital transformation. So the first challenge which you have is, of course, find the right problem to solve. There's no use creating the greatest model and the greatest automation if actually it gets used once a year, for example. So what we need to make sure is that we find the problems which are worth solving, which means they're commonly encountered, and also that they are otherwise very intensive in terms of time to do. And also, of course, we need to be able to solve them, right? So there's a few aspects of the products which cannot be modeled yet. Of course, there's work ongoing, but we need to identify the sweet spot between things people need and things we can do. And then it's, of course, also changing the habits. Many colleagues have been in the company for a long time, and the digital transformation has been going on for a few years, but this may be a small part of their working life. And so we need to change the habits of the colleagues so that they think about these digital tools and how they can employ them in their daily life to really speed up the processes. Of course, who just do not really think that this is here to stay. And so we need to show them what's possible and how it can improve their daily lives as well. And the solution approaches we have there are that we have a digital roadmap so that people know what's going to come next and the main topics we're working on. There's also idea competitions surrounding trying to find the main pain points which colleagues are facing. And there's also workshops so that the modeling experts, for example, come to the chemical R&D colleagues and explain to them what they do, how their models work, with not only the aim of showing what can be done right now, but also that colleagues keep them in mind for when they have a new project and they realize, oh, actually, then maybe kinetic modeling can really help me speed up this project. And of course, we need to share when we have successes and continuously improve the apps. Because, for example, if an app is done, doesn't mean it's done forever. Technology improves, and maybe later on we can add more detail or more submodels to it to improve the predictability. Okay, and with that, I want to summarize. So for BSF, digitalization is a key in accelerating innovation. We have a tailored selection of approaches and techniques that can deliver the desired changes, and so we focus on what works for us. Might not be the best option for someone else. So you always need to think about what approach is best for your problem at hand. And of course, need to ask the right questions and make the results available to a wide audience to ensure a lasting benefit so that you don't work in a corner. And I think this also probably applies to academia. Make sure you solve problems which other people care about, and then make sure you spread the results so that everyone can benefit from what you have done. And lastly, don't forget the humans. Transforming the organization may actually be the hardest part in all of this. So make sure that everyone is along for the ride. Okay, and with that, I am done with my presentation. I'm now very happy to take any questions you might have.
Ooh. Thank you very much, Nils, for a great talk. I really enjoyed it. Found a lot of parallels with the work I was doing during my PhD and stuff I worried about. So yeah, really engaging, really interesting. We've got a few questions from the audience. First one was asked before the talk even began by Francesco. The question was, how did you find the jump from academic research to industrial R&D, and what are the biggest differences for an early career researcher?
That's a very good question, Francesco. So I found it very interesting, but also challenging. So there's, because of course my PhD did prepare me for a lot of the technical work, which I am doing right now. So the biggest challenge was learning how a big organization works and how a big organization can be influenced and moved and shifted, which is primarily focusing on the last bit I was talking about, the transforming the organization bit. That's probably the one thing where I learned most during these last years since joining.
Yeah, is it like, do you mean it's there's a lot more work focusing on sort of convincing people to do things and more sort of looking at things from a bigger picture rather than the more from sort of smaller details, or do you mean something else?
It's a mix of things. So on the one hand side, there's the bit about convincing other people and making sure that everyone moves along with you. But then there's also the bit that in the PhD you primarily do everything by yourself. At least I think that's quite a common experience, that you do everything from setting what you want to do, to doing it, to presenting the results. And in industrial R&D, I found that you work a lot more with more people, and so working with more colleagues and making sure everyone is aligned and doing this project management. That's something which is probably quite a big change, that you go from a team of 1 to maybe 2 to maybe a team of, say, 10 people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks. Yeah, we also got a question here from Francesca this time, asking what BASF's stance is on sustainable plastics and plant-based plastics and this sort of thing, and what are the obstacles approaching the transition to more sustainable solutions. I don't know how much you know about this, but
that's a really good question, and of course I cannot have to preface this probably by saying that there's maybe also a more official answer to all of this. Which I'm not.
Niels's views do not represent the whole.
However, it is a big topic within BSF, especially also in my division, as we produce lots of polymers. Sustainability is really the significance of it is increasing quite a lot over the last years. Probably the biggest hurdles are that customer requirements are usually that the performance needs to be exactly the same as the previous product, which was not say sustainable in the most broad use of the term. So that's one of the big challenges, and then also cost, of course, because often these solutions they are expensive because they're new and they require a lot of R&D. And so they're very expensive and sometimes performing a little bit less good. And so that's, of course, not an easy sales pitch. But both of these aspects are being worked on. And actually, the amount of sustainable materials sold is increasing quite a lot over the last years. And then there's also the aspect of what is a sustainable material, right? So there's various different things which may be called a sustainable material. So they may be plant-based, for example, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're also compostable. There's non-plant-based ones, so crude oil-based ones, which are actually compostable. And then there's also just having more recycling and improving recyclability. So there's lots of different aspects to what sustainable means, and so basically it's there's the one hurdle, the technical one, the other one figuring out what people actually want and what the best solution is for various parts.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much for that. That's it's a big problem for the future, sustainability, and I don't think plastic only industry struggling with this shift at the moment. So it's interesting to see sort of all the challenges there. Another question from Francesco here, asking whether, so you mentioned, and I was actually quite interested in this as well. You're mentioning your big digitalization strategy of automation, data management, and bringing it all back together. And he was talking about how difficult is it to sort of connect and label all the data and ensure it's accessible to different team areas, and how do you sort of go about that task? Do you have a custom solution? Have you bought sort of one of these more prepackaged solutions? How are they doing this? I'm not sure how much you're allowed to give away BASF secrets here, but as much as you can.
I think I can answer that question. So yeah, I mean, this question has quite a lot of it to unpack. So the first one is, how do we go about labeling all of it? That is actually, especially in R&D, a big challenge, because the processes which you're trying to document vary and change over time and constantly, basically, right? So because there's new approaches, new technologies, new types of materials which you're producing. So there's not really like a one fixed step-by-step process, which just is being repeated years on end, but it's very flexible. So you need so on the one hand side, you need to first identify this process clearly, and thinking about how to very accurately describe this especially in a way that someone who hasn't been involved in it, which would probably be the data scientist afterwards, so that he can also identify this process and then use it for modeling and know what data belongs together. It's not easy, so there's a lot of discussions involved with the colleagues who actually work on the in the R&D part and experimentally. And then you need sort of a flexibility within your software that you can adjust as needed. And so we do have a mix of custom-based, custom-built software, which is sort of tailored to our processes and what we do. And then there's also some software which is bought in, but usually even if it's bought in, there's a fair bit of tweaking and customization so that it works for us, that it represents the processes which we're looking at. So it's really very much a mix of things. But I think the biggest challenge is probably the one making sure you very accurately are able to describe the process in the first place and see if there's any differences, especially along processing.
Yeah, that's sounds very familiar with what I was doing in my work as well. Like structuring it and sort of labeling it in the first part was the biggest challenge for me as well.
Yeah, I can imagine there's a fair bit of overlap with sorting your own data during a PhD.
Yeah.
Just by a scale of a few hundred people.
Yeah, no, it's definitely more of a challenge scaled up with everyone else. But that's really interesting to see how you tackle that. There's a question here from an anonymous viewer this time. Point on, so he was saying he was really interested in your discussing the succession of technology, and he was wondering if you could give an example of how you apply this in your own job.
What is exactly meant by succession of technology? So you mean sort of the...
Well, I can only guess, but I'm assuming he means like talking about this sort of progress of like sort of succeeding steps along technological chain and having to, you've got all these different areas you're upgrading one at a time, and and that might be needed to be upgraded further in the future, and how you sort of take all this into account in your job. I might be wrong. That might not be what he meant
but
at all.
That seems like a reasonable interpretation of the question. So in that sense, that's where the bit I mentioned, I think, about the digital roadmap comes in. So there's a lot of things which we want to do, of course, and we have many ideas, but we can't do everything for everyone immediately, right? There's some limits to how much we can do. And so there it's really key that we look into where the most benefit lies to do each activity, basically. For example, if you're looking about what equipment to upgrade, you need to look into what is the expected benefit. If you're looking at what model to build next, again, you need to always look at what's available, what can we do. Also, of course, a bit of research in terms of we don't know yet if we can do this, but let's try. That also exists, of course. And then really trying to figure out where most of the benefit lies, and that's a very complicated part because especially when when you're not doing things such as upgrading infrastructure, but really trying to develop new tools or new models, it's very much a research activity. So you don't know exactly what you will get at the end. And so yeah, you need to. There's a bit of guesswork involved, probably, but yeah, we try and figure out where basically most value is.
Yeah, a lot of sense. That's a very good approach. Yeah. Okay. Only a couple more questions left, and then I think we'll. We can call it. So we've got one here asking, can you give an example of a complex and engaging task that humans should focus on while you're automating all these tasks, or most tasks are automated? Someone worried about their future job options there, I'm sure.
I'm not worried at all about robots overtaking humans completely anytime in the near future, or even the midterm future. There's still many things which humans can do better than robots. So the robots were really good at when we do very much repetitive tasks, and we can quite well describe what needs to be done. But the humans are a lot better when it comes to especially to some things which are difficult to quantify. So especially, for example, with those foams I mentioned earlier. So really getting there's a certain amount of feel involved in trying to figure out which one is better than the other one. There are, of course, a certain amount of hard characteristics which we can describe and measure and so on. But there is a bit of, because it's a material which people interact with, they touch, so the fair amount of touching it and judging based on that. So that's something where robots, for example, are not very good yet. And then also for things where we just sort of try something new out of sort of like a very new field, or we're trying to start in very different type of approach to something. And then it, of course, would be not very smart to build the big robot first, then see if it works, and then find out that, oh, actually, this doesn't work, let's scrap the robot. That's too expensive and time consuming. So humans are very good at doing many different things and new things as well, and giving feedback to how they might improve it once they do the test, right? So we do have very experienced lab technicians, and they're very valuable in sort of giving feedback and helping shape the experiment. And that's really what robots cannot do at the moment.
That is very reassuring. I'm sure. Yeah, there's a lot still to do. Okay, one final question here from someone just labeled K, and I realized I didn't publish it, my bad. One final question asking, can you point out any of the key challenges of composite materials research and development?
Yeah, okay, it's
a broad question.
Moving a little bit outside of my expertise. So we do have composite materials. We do produce them, and we have researchers and developers work on composite materials. I think personally, I don't really probably not qualified to answer what the key challenges are in it. So yeah, I might have to defer that question.
Okay, that's fair. And we did just get one more in, so maybe we can end on this one, which also this does seem more in your wheelpark and probably a good one to end on in case people are interested in the talk. So I was asking about the application to be process for BASF and the kind of level of flexibility you have in your role. I don't know what flexibility means in this case, time and flexibility or what, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a question I think I can answer. So the process of applying, generally jobs get posted on the BSF job board. So if you go on the website, there's jobs get announced. In my case, I had the benefit of doing my PhD with BSF, so I knew some contacts which were very helpful in discussions of figuring out which role might be a good fit for me. But generally, everything which is available is always also posted online. And then the process was quite smooth. So we would go for interviews and so on. People generally very friendly. And within the role, I do feel I have an amount of flexibility in the sense that, especially because I work on quite a broad topic. As you saw, there's lots of aspects involved in what I do. And so looking at which ones we do, what focus we put next, I do have a fair amount of flexibility in deciding on that. And so basically all colleagues, especially around R&D, that's the area I can most comment on right now. So the types of projects you do and so on, these are usually proposed by the people who will then run it. And so you do have a fair bit of chance to guide your working life.
Fantastic. Yeah, so if you're interested, Joe, check all that out. So that's all the questions for today. Thank you so much for giving a great talk. It's really interesting. Yeah, and thank you for everyone who watched and asked questions. If you're interested in coming to more of these talks, like I say, follow us on Twitter or sign up to our main list. I think it's I don't know how you sign up again. If you look on our website, if you search if you Google SFE London Student Chapter, you'll find our website with all the information of how to sign up. Our next talk is on the 22nd of February, I believe. Let me just double check. Yep, Monday, 22nd of February at 10 a.m. That'll be given by Dr. Xinyang Huang, who is doing some really interesting research in all sorts of different areas. I think he'll be talking just about dripping, but I can't remember exactly. But it's gonna be really interesting. Again, you can find all the information on our website. So 22nd February is the one date to put in your diaries. But apart from that, thank you again, Niels. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks everyone.